The 2017 feature-length adaptation of the Judas Contract is one that people have asked about ever since my previous Teen Titans video went viral. What I can say right off the bat is that it's not terrible, but it's not great either. It has solid voice acting and dialogue that flows well, alongside some well-choreographed and storyboarded action scenes. Any critiques I have of this film are done from the perspective of seeing what could have been done to make it better. The DC animated universe has released 32 films over the course of 11 years, and in all honesty, I feel like that number could have been trimmed down. For comparison's sake, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has released 20 films over 10 years, and while their budgets are significantly higher and require more time to be worked on, that's kind of my point. They take their time, and even those movies can be on the light side when it comes to their narratives. Since 2009, the DCAU has released an average of 3 movies per year, apart from 2010 where they released 4. It's a smart business strategy as they're given minimal budgets, which have a high chance of return on investment, but all I can think about is how those resources could have been better utilized. With some notable exceptions, the stories are nowhere near as fleshed out, the animation can be spotty, and their adaptations can be a mix of unnecessary plot threads and rushed character development. I'm not saying they're bad, I like a good portion of them, yet I'm always left feeling that they could be so much more, as they have the same problem as the MCU, enjoyable in the moment, but weakens under scrutiny. I'm saying all of this as a fan of their work because I want to see something more than an entertaining by-the-numbers action movie. I feel that if they pooled the resources into making one higher budget 2-hour film, the quality would be considerably higher and make the universe something to be eagerly anticipating rather than a reminder that it exists. Which brings me back to the Judas Contract and why I believe it didn't work as well as it could have, and I'll be talking about it with the idea that you've seen my previous Teen Titans video. If you haven't, I recommend you do before watching this one, as I go into greater detail about the comic's history and the changes made in the 2003 TV show. While the chain of events is faithful, there are slight but ultimately significant changes that led the Judas Contract to fall short of its potential. Let's do a quick recap. The Judas Contract follows the Teen Titans consisting of Starfire, Raven, Robin, Beast Boy, Blue Beetle, and Nightwing as they're set up and portrayed by a fellow member, Tara Markov. She's an undercover spy working under the direction of Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke, who was contracted to do so by religious leader Brother Blood and his cult of followers known as the Hive. Brother Blood pays Deathstroke to capture the Titans to harness their abilities to achieve a form of godhood, who in turn uses Tara to gain the Titans' trust and lure them into a false sense of security. The film focuses on Tara's inability to integrate with the Titans and how they conflict with her job to spy on them. This is shown by her PTSD triggers, which cause her to lose control of her powers, her disgust towards social relationships, and her slowly escalating distrust of Deathstroke as she spends more time with the Titans. Ultimately, she does follow through with her role and gets the group captured, but that doesn't last long when an assumed to be killed Nightwing manages to release the Titans. Brother Blood is defeated and Tara dies from the collapsing debris after being betrayed by Deathstroke and fully losing control of her powers. The Titans, Beast Boy specifically, attempt to move on from her death while adding a new member of the team, Donna Troy, aka Wonder Girl. Roll credits. The Judas Contract could have been better if it was about 30 minutes longer. Not counting the ending credits, the runtime is a concerning 80 minutes, meaning it's shorter than your average theatrical comedy by 10 minutes. And when you have less than an hour and a half, you must make each scene count, and all subplots must be in service of the main narrative. Otherwise, you're taking time away from characters and events that need to be developed, and the audience will feel like their time is being wasted. So with that in mind, why is the first 4.5 minutes of this movie dedicated to a scene that has nothing to do with the overall plot? The first 4.5 minutes are focused on the original Teen Titans, consisting of Robin, Beast Boy, Speedy, Bumblebee, and Kid Flash, coming across Starfire fleeing her homeworld of Tamaran. They exchange some banter, Beast Boy gets a Twitter account, they notice an anomaly above the city, rescue Starfire from bad guys, and after some more banter, Dick introduces her to the group. Cut to opening credits. What irks me the most about this scene, aside from the fact that 3/5 of the team are irrelevant and aren't seen past his prologue, is that Starfire's introduction serves no narrative or thematic purpose. She was already established in Justice League vs. Teen Titans, this film's canonical predecessor released 1 year prior. Even if this was one's first introduction to her, the film skips ahead several years, removing any character development we could have seen from her time on Earth. What does the audience gain from learning about her sister's coup and her attempted escape? This is made worse when you consider that the previous film already went over these details.
Nightwing said you were a princess. Exiled, no doubt.
Technically, it was a coup.
How does it relate to the film's themes aside from a potential admittedly reaching link between the coup and Tara's future betrayal? Starfire's relationship with Nightwing is clearly defined without this scene, based on flirtatious dialogue, so having a 5-year time skip with no difference in character development just goes to show how little that scene was needed. The only topic that returns is Beast Boy's Twitter account, but that could have been easily introduced in the following scene, which it is anyway. This opening could have been used instead to introduce Tara to the current day Teen Titans. It's not impossible to present a character to an established group, but it's much harder to do so when you only have 80 minutes. As this is a direct sequel to Justice League vs. Teen Titans, it would have been great to see how she first came to meet the team. In that film, Tara is shown heading towards Titan's Tower in a mid-credit stinger, with an arguably better design than what she had in the final product. What was her first meeting like? Did she demand to join, or did she use a fake backstory? Did any of the team object? I know Robin would have, especially since that film spent most of its runtime getting him to work in a team. Then suddenly this girl with Earth power shows up out of the blue and he's okay with it? The film is essentially using the 5-year time skip as a crutch to excuse any lapses in character development. Unlike the TV show, which took liberties with the source material, the Judas Contract is a rather straight adaptation of the original comics, with changes made to accommodate the updated team and universe. Therefore, Tara could have been recruited into the Titans by having her be attacked by an unknown group, or just have her be robbing a bank for blackmail reasons, like her comic book counterpart. You could even make the group attacking her be the Hive. That way it shows them as this long-standing conflict that the Titans been dealing with instead of a random villain of the week. This would have helped fleshed out Tara a bit more, since she just randomly shows up as a part of the group after the prologue, with only a few lines of dialogue to acknowledge that. You wouldn't even have to change the scenario all that much. Just replace Starfire with Tara and have the Titans notice her plight as they're driving along. I'm harping on this opening a lot because I know they can do better. As stated, everything must matter when you're working within limited constraints, and you don't have to look far to see where it was done well. Compare all of what I just critiqued to the opening of Justice League vs. Teen Titans and you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. The beginning of that film sets up everything that will play a role in the events to come. It establishes Trigon as the main villain, his ability to possess people, his goal of finding Raven, the League's overwhelming strength, that Damian is Batman's son, Damian's inability to work with others, and the idea of sending him to Titan's Tower. Whether or not one had seen Son of Batman, you get all the info needed to catch up. Granted, it's not perfect as the scene is just under 9 minutes and could have easily been cut down to 3, given that it spends way too much time on the fighting, but it did exactly what it needed to do, set up the event of the narrative and have a reason for Damian to join the Titans. This makes the prologue feel like an extension of the plot, which the Judas Contract failed to do. This leads to the second issue, and that is what the Judas Contract decided to leave in from the original material. A trait of poor adaptation is not giving proper time for subplots and character motivations to be established or connected thematically. It's a relatively common problem and usually comes about when the creative staff decide to put in too much of the original material without considering the limitations of the medium. I don't think I need to remind people about M. Night Shyamalan's Last Airbender, a film that took over 6 hours of written material and tried to cram it into just 2. A large majority of the scenes in the Judas Contract don't connect. They don't flow from one moment to the next because the character interactions and motivations aren't naturally tied to the main conflict. One issue comes from how the Hive is set up as the main villain, or rather, how they aren't. See, the Hive was originally a terrorist organization helmed by an unknown figure known as the Hive Master and the Council of Seven. They had the generic goal of global domination, but what was interesting was their logic in going after the Teen Titans. Knowing they couldn't take over the world with superheroes around, they decided to take out the Titans because they knew they weren't tough enough to take on both them and the Justice League. This is where Slade Wilson comes into play, as they originally tried to hire him for an assassination contract, but after that fell through, they went and got his son Grant instead. They injected him with an experimental formula that gave him the same strength and reflexes as Slade, but due to complications, he died in his father's arms. Slade in turn picked up the contract in honor of his son. Therefore, once the Judas Contract comic was released, the Hive was an established group that had logical reasons for clashing with the Titans. Conversely, the problem with the film adaptation is that there's no reason for the Titans to be fighting the Hive. At least not one that makes sense. They're introduced as extremists led by Brother Blood that Nightwing's been tracking for some time, yet no explanation is given as to what they've done to cause him to be on their tail. No information is given about their work or why they couldn't leave it to the authorities. All that would be needed to rectify this would be showing how the Hive is seen to the masses. If we were shown Nightwing getting frustrated with a lack of action by authorities, or at least told that, his reasons for going after the Hive would have actual weight.
Lies. My church is a holy place, and we strive only to do good.
Come now, Brother Blood. Isn't your church just a glorified cult?
Unlike you, Bryce, I believe in an America where all beliefs should be treated with respect. It's a shame the press doesn't.
What did we learn from that clip that we didn't already hear from Nightwing? This gives off the impression that he's going after this cult for little reason other than he can, which is odd considering there are various other adversaries he could focus on. Essentially, the film is relying on the audience's previous knowledge of the Hive from other media to fill in the blanks, and all that does is weaken the story. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made Brother Blood the leader, which wasn't introduced until the 2003 TV show. Why does Brother Blood need the Titan's powers to achieve godhood? He states he's waited hundreds of years for technology to let him do so, but why the Titans specifically? Why not the Justice League or any of the other dozens of heroes flying around? It made sense in the original comic because they noted how they weren't strong enough to take on the League, but since nothing is established, it comes across like a random decision. Other side plots don't make much sense either. Blue Beetle has a side story about how his alien bug is getting worse around people, which prevents him from seeing his family. So he volunteers at a homeless shelter to calm the bug's nervousness, but that's never resolved as it still freaks out throughout the entire movie, and his family appears at the end like everything's fine. Deathstroke has a vendetta against Damian for losing his chance at being the leader of the League of Assassins, but he didn't get the contract because of it. Unlike the original Slade, this Deathstroke is hired and just happens to have a personal reason. Quite a different role, and one that just makes things less meaningful. A far cry from Justice League vs. Teen Titans, where the screenplay is centered around Raven, Trigon, and Damian, all of which had clear and concise setups and payoffs. Everything in that film has a purpose for being within the narrative. The villain has connections to one of the protagonists, Damian's self-centeredness is addressed and worked on through personal connections and confrontations, and all characters play a necessary role, no matter how small. While it may seem obvious that a screenplay should set up threads and pay them off by the end, you'd be surprised how often that isn't done. All of this, however, pales in comparison to what they did to Tara. This film's interpretation of Tara Markov is tricky to talk about because she's not a straight copy of the original character, nor was she revamped like her 2003 counterpart. Rather, she's a combination of the two, having the insecurity and power control issues of the TV show while keeping the malicious nature and general plot outline of the comics. This seems interesting on paper, but in execution doesn't nail the emotional hit they were aiming for. For starters, the reason why the 2003 version of Tara worked so well was because they changed her entire personality to make it a fall from grace, a tragic character manipulated into villainy due to self-hatred and Slade's silver tongue. She had genuine interest in joining the Titans, and therefore the emotion comes from seeing someone who could have been good turn bad. On the opposite side of the spectrum, the original Tara was an unambiguously evil person, specifically designed to have no redeeming qualities. While both her and her brother Brian were given powers through experimentation, Tara was created to show how different two people can be despite the exact same upbringing. While Brian became the hero Geoforce and led a virtuous life, Tara believed in using her powers to get what she wanted. Her death was to be heartbreaking for Beast Boy, who she manipulated, and her brother, but no one else. Attempting to combine these two drastic personalities is odd, and I feel like they realized this because they tried to make Tara sympathetic through a cruel and frankly over-the-top backstory. She was tortured by her local community, being tied to the back of a truck and dragged around before an attempted execution, all because the citizens of her hometown believed her to be a witch. They clearly have technology and they're not some hidden convent in the woods. As such, it makes no sense as to why they would see her as this evil witch like it's the Salem witch trials. In a world where Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Constantine, Captain Marvel, Zatanna, all of Batman's villains, and Superman exists, they somehow draw the line at being able to move rocks and consider it witchcraft? To be blunt, I find that ridiculous as it's never explained where this is, what she did to be vilified, or why they targeted her specifically in a world with superpowered beings. Therefore, Tara's actions are no longer psychopathic in nature, but rather a form of PTSD. This is completely understandable, and I'm in no way downplaying PTSD, but the backstory for said PTSD is so nonsensical and poorly explained, making it difficult to empathize with her. I'd hate to bring up the previous film again, but in that movie they dedicated an entire section to Raven's history, from her birth to her life with Trigon and Hell, giving the audience an explanation as to why she acts the way she does. This ties into Tara's relationship with Deathstroke, which also took a hit in the logic department. Originally, Tara had been a mercenary that crossed paths with Slade on a job, and it's made explicitly clear that Tara was using him as much as he was using her. In the movie, Tara views Slade as her savior and is kept in isolation to be independent on him for as long as possible. When viewed outside of the context of her backstory, their relationship is quite disturbing. Slade is an elderly man who's stringing along a teenage girl with the promise of a romantic getaway after training her to be an undercover spy, causing his eventual betrayal to be a true stab in her heart as he was the one person she trusted.
You don't know anything about him. He saved me.
Let me guess. He kept you isolated, dependent, told you everyone was your enemy, trained you ruthlessly, and promised you exactly what you wanted. Believe me, I know.
She was so dependent on him that she refused to make emotional connections with anyone else, viewing friendship and kindness as abnormalities rather than necessities. Thus, her story, on paper, is a good evolution of the source material. Having her be a trauma victim raised by a manipulative killer is horrifying, but say it with me now, they didn't take time to develop this. Since she randomly appears as part of the team, the audience is robbed of an entire year's worth of character interaction. Yet it's evident they decided to go with the most well-known Teen Titans story without thinking of how the lack of build-up would hurt the narrative. It's comparable to the DC Cinematic Universe, where they went straight from Man of Steel to Batman v Superman without the necessary time to introduce all the key players in an organic way. So when Beast Boy goes on an emotional monologue about how Tara was a diamond in the rough and needed a better upbringing, I don't feel anything. I don't have a connection with her because her story doesn't feel natural. I understand the situations around her life are horribly upsetting, but since we barely have any time to truly get to know her, it sadly falls on deaf ears. It's not like her 2003 counterpart where we got to spend an entire episode seeing her grapple with the moral ambiguity of her actions. Rather, it's regulated to a few moments of quiet introspection, but they're not paid off properly because her reasons for fighting Deathstroke in the end are personal. She doesn't go after him to save the Titans. She does it because she was betrayed. While she does save Beast Boy, the emotional significance doesn't feel earned because she still treated him like garbage 10 minutes early with no resolution, and she wasn't faking it. She meant everything she said. So how do you expect me to be sympathetic with a character that you literally just told me 10 minutes earlier was a horrible person? You can't tell me to be sympathetic towards somebody and then do everything in your power to show that they're a bad person. Her relationship with the Titans isn't explored in the ending, which could have been okay if she was just an evil person, which meant she would have been just selfish enough to not care about the Titans being killed, but just her own personal issues. It's funny, in a way, that the most accurate depiction of Tara is from a TV show that the fanbase is opposed to. Teen Titans Go has, without hyperbole, the most faithful adaptation of Tara Markov that's ever been put on screen. Putting aside the show's comedic tone, this Tara is cunning and evil for no reason other than she can. She hates every single member of the Titans with a burning passion, and the relationship between her and Beast Boy is kept completely one-sided. She gains their trust to destroy the Titans from within and becomes a recurring villain throughout the show. The creators understood what their show was about and knew they couldn't make Tara sympathetic because that story arc wouldn't fit their tone, so instead they kept her motivations intact and simply removed the adult aspects. This is only speculation, but the team behind the Judas Contract may have gone the sympathetic route out of fear. The creative team could have been afraid that an amoral and straightforward villain would be cliché, that the audience would not be sympathetic towards Tara, and that was their greatest mistake. The creators George Perez and Mark Wolfman made it clear that Tara was not meant to be loved or missed. By introducing elements of the TV show that had an entirely revamped persona, one that was meant to be the complete opposite, they tried to mix oil with water. Instead of taking the leap and letting the character be who she was, they ultimately made a character who was less sympathetic. If it wasn't evident for both this and my previous video, I love the Judas Contract story. I think it's an important moment in the history of comics and led to a fantastic reinterpretation decades later. When I found out that they made a feature-length adaptation based solely on the original material, I was excited, but ultimately it left me disappointed. The film tries to make adjustments that did not mesh with the story that they were trying to tell. It tried to have its cake and eat it too, but like we all know, that isn't how things work. From what I can tell, Young Justice has its own version of Tara, and I can only assume they're going to set up the Judas Contract from there, alongside the Titans TV show, which I recommend, that has casted both Deathstroke and Jericho. All I can suggest those two properties do is to leave Tara exactly how she was. Unless you're going to completely change the character like in 2003, Tara should be as evil as they can be. But as of now, the only Tara worth watching is the insecure little girl from 2003. And that is a damn shame.